Okay. Okay, thank you, Heidi. The platform is yours, so the slide is visible, right?
Excellent. Thank you very much. I don't actually know whether Rafa has given his talk yet.
No, we have the video for that. So.
Okay, excellent. So I can claim that this title is mine. Otherwise, I had to admit I'd kind of plagiarized it from him. Oh. Is it in another? Okay, I can do a little bit of talking first. So I've basically divided the slide pack into pre-TAPAS, during TAPAS, after TAPAS, trying to give a little bit of perspective on things. And I'm hoping we can. Face the change in the slides?
Can you see the change of slide?
No. Yeah, okay. But it's not changed on there.
Oh, okay, wait. So that's the reason. And it should be fine. Is that okay?
Okay. Online as well. Okay, was that better? Okay, excellent. So this is pre-TAPAS years in one slide. So generally back then we had very small data sets. Dementia Bank was the only, as far as I'm aware of. Okay, perfect. So Dementia Bank that a lot of you have worked on was the only publicly available data set. It was good in that there was something available, but there were a few issues with that we still kind of suffer from. So for starters, it's only got healthy controls and Alzheimer's disease patients. They are clinically the two easiest group to kind of distinguish. So it's not the most interesting data to work with in that way. Also, sort of in terms of machine learning, it's relatively easy to do the distinction. So you get results up around 90%. But it did mean that lots of people got interested in the area. Another problem that we had in the beginning, what a lot of groups tended to stay away with from the problems of ASR, the challenges of developing a good ASR system. So they chose to ignore that bit and pretend we had perfect transcription and then work on the manual transcripts. So no errors. And of course, we know that that is really not close to what we really need in a real system. There was, of course, a lot of evidence in literature, and that still stands, and the need for having these automated systems. So there was very public or very famous studies on, for example, Iris Murdoch, a famous British author, looking at her novels through time, so written language, and looking at how the vocabulary and the language in general kind of diminished over time. And similar with Ronald Reagan, and people have analyzed his sort of non-scripted parts of his kind of press conferences to again see that his language later on in his kind of presidency was diminishing. And he was, I think, after just 5 years out of office, diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. So he would have had symptoms already at that point. In terms of what we sort of brought into the project in Sheffield, we had the first paper in Speech 2016, working on some conversations of neurologists with patients in their office. We had a very staggering word error rate of 40.6, so this was tricky data, and we just had 39 conversations to work on. So there wasn't a lot of data around. You can see in the picture there, this was from Fred Jelinek summer school in 2016, so there's some famous pictures there, including a young Camilo. And Elmanood. So during the TAPAS years, we had Elin from TAPAS in Sheffield, and Baman Haidari continued his PhD. He finished in 2019. And since then, we've had other PhDs kind of join. The research moved on. So we started collecting data ourselves, and various other groups did as well. which meant we could start using some of these more deep learning architectures that we saw from other areas, NLP and sort of broader mainstream speech tech. We brought them in with some success. So we were still hammered by not having too much data, but it kind of worked. From industry, we also saw an increasing interest, including from Therapy Box. I remember early on running this idea, Swapnil, aren't you interested in cognitive? And he was like, I don't think so. But a bit later on, he was interested. So that's benefited us a lot. And that's excellent. So I know in all of our areas, even 5 years ago, funders would always say, but why should we fund you? Why aren't the big companies doing this? And back then we could, well, perhaps there isn't interest, but even in disaster speech, the big companies are moving in, which I think we have to see as an advantage and work with it. More data also appeared, or seemingly more data. So there was the address and the addresso challenges. This was repurposed dementia bank data. So they wanted to kind of get rid of some of the problems with the dementia bank database, including that it was very noisy in terms of acoustic noise. So they did some post-processing. In our experience, it didn't actually help. So ASR actually was worse on these post-processed files. But they also balanced the diagnostic labels. And that's, I think, is useful in all areas to have these challenges because it's sort of ready-made data sets. It comes with test and training and some tasks. So it does drive the research, which is good. In Sheffield, we developed the CognoSpeak tool, the early version, you can see on the picture there, and started collecting data in Memory Clinic. And on the right here, you can see it's a graph from a very good overview paper from 2020, I think. They had a very useful graph of the increase in papers. So there's very few people working in this area, but suddenly it kind of exploded. I haven't done it for the last 2 or 3 years, but it's getting crowded, I think we could say. So lots of people moving in and taking an interest, which is good. And, if you're reviewing for interspeech, you can see as well, there are kind of now increasing number of sessions. So it's really becoming popular, which we should capitalize on. So looking ahead, in terms of data, we always want more data. I think there's definitely scope for having an address 3. So we are hoping that we can take the picture description data, so the cookie theft picture description we have from CognoSpeak, and add it to address. So that's not personal data, and hopefully that will help. It's collected through laptops. So in terms of audio quality, it's a lot better than the dementia bank data. It's British accent, so that adds a bit of interest, I think, to the collection. So hopefully we can continue doing that. And I'm hoping that we can somehow set up a data collection broadly so that from lots of different countries and accent backgrounds, we could share something like cookie theft. It's obviously quite basic in terms of assessment, but I think it's a good start. I think also it's worth thinking about moving beyond recording of currently available automated tests. So that's the kind of obvious thing when you bring in computers. Let's take what's done in clinic and immediately translate it into doing things in a computational way. But I think we really have to, and I think a lot of you have touched upon this as well, think about what can I bring in addition that the computer can do. And also I think thinking of different types of tests that you do. So the CognoSpeak is, it does have the picture description, it does have the verbal fluency tests, things like name as many animals as you can in a minute. But it also has at the core a set of questions, which is really probing your memory. So things like, what did you do over the weekend? And we kind of listen for the kind of subtleties of what comes through in the answers. And I think that's the way to do. You have to develop a sort of broader type of test. In terms of research, obviously with more data, there's more options for exploring bigger and fancier neural networks. We have to improve the ASR, keep improving. So almost all of you have touched upon ASR, regardless of what you're working on. And the kind of learnings from all these different areas kind of feed together. Longitudinal tracking, lots of you have mentioned, which is good. In terms of clinical benefit, this is really useful. But it's also in terms of data, the most difficult, because to have people come back and give samples is really tricky. So getting them to consent to doing it once is okay, but then to get back to them 6 months and 12 months. So we're doing it on some projects now, but the numbers are small. And that's why there hasn't been much traction in this area. It's basically really difficult data to get your hands on. And then I think a lot of you have touched upon this as well. Confounding factors. So people come in, they speak to the system or they do it at home, but there's lots of other things going on in their life. They're old, there might be mood problems, hearing impairments, etc. They might have a cold. Lots of things will be transpired through the speech signal, and the signal we work with from data sets, etc., is kind of clean in that we haven't always got, you know, if you've got a cold, the doctor will tell you come back another day and do the assessment. So there's, you know, it's sort of, you stay away clear of some of these problems. And then I think we really need to think about expanding the diagnostic classes we can handle. We've tried to do this with CognoSpeak, so trying to recruit everyone that comes through the door, not just the kind of easy classes, the healthy controls and the kind of Alzheimer's, because it's those classes in the middle that are tricky. And that's where we can really help out. So CognoSpeak on the right there is our new look tool, which we're very proud of. So we're hoping that to go live probably in the next month or so. With a control group, so out in GP. So in the UK, that will be the first port of call if you have memory problems. So that is hugely exciting. We have with the old system probably up towards 300 recordings now. So we have a lot of data, but they're all in the sort of secondary care memory clinics. So this is out in the first line of defense, if you like. And then we're hoping in general to, or later on, be able to put it live on big websites where people can sign up and sort of generally take part in research. And then the last thing I just wanted to cover is, which a lot of people have touched upon, how do we get the research we are kind of working on in the lab out into real use with people, those kind of translational challenges, this sort of testing in the wild. So we've done that for a couple of years now. And I have to say, although we had tested the system quite a lot at home, if you like, in the lab, also with real users, when we let it loose, and they try it at home, all sorts of things happen, even with the best instructions. So people have got dogs in the background, they take a phone call, they answer the door, you would not believe it, all sorts of things. So of course they're at home and there's no clinician to kind of help them. So you need to have a system that can kind of cope with these things, or can be restarted, or whatever it is that's kind of needed, because you haven't got control. And that is, of course, before you have all the other kind of televisions on in the background and all these kind of things. So people are basically unpredictable. And then the other thing that I'm very interested in, that Dan will have touched upon a little bit as well, is to make sure the system works for everyone. So there is a lot of bias in our data. So the data we've used, for example, all of our healthy controls, or most of them, are not actually people who turned up thinking they possibly had dementia, but turned out not to have. These are people we've recruited through elsewhere. So they, when they do the system, are not particularly worried about being flagged as having dementia. So that's their speech, I think, will sound very different to someone who comes in and have gone to the doctor and think, I might have dementia. That's very different. So I think once we start seeing those people, that will sound quite different. We know there's a lot of people who don't even turn up to the doctors with dementia problems or memory problems. So Dan was talking about ethnic minorities, for example, that has a lot of stigma about going to the doctor. So there's a lot of people we don't see in our data, even if we're really careful to try and recruit everyone that comes through the door. There's just people who don't present. Then there's language problems. So we're looking a lot at accents. So currently we've got a lot of nice South Yorkshire accents in our collection. But hoping to, of course, broaden that out, because we need to deal with all accents in the UK and all non-native accents. So in a country like the UK, of course, many people, old people as well, will not be born in the UK. And then I think we really need to start looking at exploring other cohorts. So Parkinson's disease, there's also cognitive impairment problems there. MND, or ALS, as it's called in the UK, so motor neuron disease. They've got huge problems. So lots, and another group we work with is stroke survivors. Again, with some of these cohorts, there's other things going on with their voice and their language abilities. So stroke survivors, of course, often have speech problems that might improve over time. MND, of course, have got speech and language problems as well. So that puts an extra challenge to the engineers to kind of cope with that. And then another thing, I think, I'm not sure whether Dan touched upon this, but combining with other modalities. So we had a student working on the video. We happened to be recording with the CognoSpeak system. Turned out to be a huge problem. People are sitting with their mobile phones in all sorts of different ways, wearing glasses, you can't see their eyes, and all sorts. EEG is another modality that we're thinking of trying to incorporate. And I think that is probably the way to go. So I think these tests we develop, feeding into a little bit what Swapnil was saying, we're working on speech, but probably they will eventually work in a sort of bigger ecosystem of other tests. And then I think, longitudinal tracker has appeared again on this side here. On the go kind of measuring or assessment of your speech. So of course, now we speak to voice assistants in the house and to your car and all sorts of things. Perhaps in the future, you're not sitting down to do an assessment. It will be your system listening out for changes over time, because it's known you since you were in your mid-30s and suddenly you can detect things are going wrong. We're much far from that, of course. And then the other thing is, so early on working with clinicians, I was told when I write papers, I was saying, oh, we're detecting dementia. And they kept saying to me, you're detecting early signs of dementia, because people with dementia, there's no doubt. But we are not actually. So the people we have in our data is, again, going back to the bias, they're not early. They are often a little bit along the way. They've wondered a long time about their memory problems. What would be really nice is to be able to collect people for a long time, and some of them happen to develop dementia. So you get that kind of changeover point. And on the right, I think a lot of you are doing this, but I can't stress enough the importance of working with your stakeholders. So getting end users and clinicians feedback all the way through. We've been lucky in Sheffield that we've worked with Dan Blackburn all the way through. And I think for the PhD students and the engineers to hear from him what is going on in clinic and his kind of expertise is invaluable. And now, as I said, we're trying to work with him to find out what should CognoSpeak be feeding back to the clinicians. What should it look like? What's a sensible and meaningful thing? And I think that synergy is invaluable for us to really have success and have any hope for making it into clinic. And that was it. This is the kind of Sheffield team. A lot of these got their PhDs during TAPAS, so that's very nice. I think normally in films you have a list of all the babies born, but we had a couple of those, but we've had most PhDs. And of course, to all of the ESRs that we didn't manage to host in Sheffield, if you ever come past or fancy coming for a little while, let us know, and we're always happy to welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi, for your interesting perspective and wider dimensions. So next we will have Aki. Yeah, so presenting, and this is the one, right, Aki? You have
magic and get slides on. It should be there.
okay. Okay, let me do this.
Yeah. please do.
Open, and I said should go. Okay. Yes.
I was still sharing because so something is different now than in previous presentations. We don't see that bar anymore.
Where? Maybe
I was
this.
sharing.
Yeah.
You are.
So
That's
pause the
step forward.
stop the recording.